Hi ho, yo yo, how you do? That's the worst intro I've done in a long time. This is Pillars of Eternity 2. This is a game I'm about 15 hours into. I really like Obsidian and all the games they make, so Pillars of Eternity 2 was obviously something I'm gonna dive into right away. I haven't had as much time to play it as I would have liked, so this is a very much a first impressions style video instead of being like a full review or anything. Obviously, I've only done like basically the first act of the game, but I wanted to talk about my experience so far in it and what you can expect when you go into the game, like at least within the first few hours. And overall, Pillars of Eternity 2 is one of the better RPGs to come out in the last 5 years or so. That being said, the last 5 years have been a great 5 years for role-playing games, and they've seen this big resurgence in the quality and the amount of really good ones that are releasing. So I feel like that kind of impacts my enjoyment on Pillars of Eternity 2 a little bit more than it would have if it came out like 3 or 4 years ago, when there was less on the market and when this was just kind of starting the resurgence of everything. So Pillars 1 was my favorite game of the past 5 years or 10 years when it came out. It was a really good RPG. Since then, we've had, obviously other games are coming out around that time, like Wasteland 2. Then we've had Divinity Original Sin 2, which I think is a better game than Pillars 1 and Pillars 2. Not necessarily because it's better as a whole, just because it scratches my specific role-playing game itch a lot better than this series does. That being said, this is a fantastic series so far, and I'm greatly enjoying my time with it. It is a little bit more like Baldur's Gate, kind of a spiritual successor type deal. It's more heavy on the character role-playing aspect than I feel like the Divinity franchise is, and because of that, I'm liking Divinity a bit more, because it's a little bit more of an open sandbox where you can be creative in finding different ways to complete quests and things like that. Not to say that you can't do that in Pillars so much. I mean, you can do it to an extent, but whereas Divinity has, say, like 5 different ways to complete a quest, this one will give you like 2 or 3, and they're generally boiled down to have everyone die, bluff or lie your way out of it, or use diplomacy, and that's totally cool, because this is a game that's more about role-playing as a specific type of character, and that's totally fine. This is more of a classic-style role-playing game, and that's cool, because I can roleplay as a couple of different types of characters, and it kind of forces me to be a bit more grounded in my character than Divinity would. So I'm playing as Smorge in this playthrough. I've kind of got 2 playthroughs going right now. I'm trying to see like what the differences in the campaign are and things like that. So my first character was very heavy into diplomacy. Smorge is a lot more violent in his tendencies, so he just kind of like, if anyone pisses him off or threatens anyone that he's friends with, then they're probably gonna get their head lopped off, and that's really fun. But I mean, like I said, you're kind of role-playing as 1 of 3 or 4 characters, whereas other games give you a bit more freedom. This is because this game is just very much more of a classic style role-playing game. And that's exactly what Obsidian were going for, and in my opinion, they've pretty much nailed that to a T. The game looks fantastic, the character portraits, the worlds you're exploring, everything about it screams old-school role-playing, but it does look really good. It does look modern enough, and they've added in things to it that make it way more enjoyable when you go in comparison to like going back and playing games like Baldur's Gate and for everything from back in that era. It's the same concept and the same general gameplay, but they put in these little quality of life improvements that we've learned from video games over the years. I mean, there's little things like the overhead map exploration has been expanded in this one, where you're not like just wandering around finding things. You are piloting and captaining an entire pirate ship with a crew that you're managing and keeping like healthy, and you have to keep their morale up, and you're fighting off other ships, you're running away from them, you're finding islands and exploring them. There's a lot more to do in Pillars of Eternity 2 rather than just wandering around the really awesome set-piece locations. You can still do a crap ton of stuff, entire quests basically, just by exploring the overhead map, which is a really good way to vary up the gameplay that you experience. So the overhead map is pretty neat. The combat itself is basically what you'd expect from a game like this. If you played Pillars of Eternity 1, it is basically the same. They might have put in a couple things to just kind of make the combat feel a bit smoother. Unfortunately, the combat to me is probably the weakest aspect of the game, and I'm someone who does a lot of diplomacy and things, so in the first 10 hours or so, I'm happy to say that I only had to do like 4 or 5 real combat scenarios because I just decided to like solve everything amicably without killing people. This other playthrough, though, I'm getting more into the combat and learning all of the different characters and the traits and the classes and abilities, and it's getting it to be a lot more enjoyable to play. But my main issue with the combat, and this is very subjective, it's not really a big thing, it's that it doesn't feel weighty, and coming off of Divinity Original Sin 2, I'm going to compare these two games quite a bit, so if you're getting angry about that, too bad, I don't really care. That game had a lot of weight to all the abilities that you could use, and part of that was because that is a predominantly turn-based game, whereas this one can be played in, I guess, turn-based combat, but it is also a real-time combat system. But all the attacks and the abilities, they lack a weight behind them when you hit everything that's around you, like the enemies and stuff, because if you miss or hit something, it's a dice roll. That's classic role-playing game stuff, I get that, but there's no different animations for missing or hitting and stuff like that, or like when you breathe fire or shoot a fireball at someone, that you don't get a lot of feedback aside from the effect that the fireball makes when it hits the ground. Like the enemies don't recoil, and you don't get a good guttural, visceral feeling from the more powerful abilities and stuff, and I feel like that would really make me enjoy the combat a lot more. And I feel like I just kind of expect that out of an RPG that comes out in 2018. I feel like they need to put a bit more effort into making everything feel like you're really doing a lot more damage and making every encounter feel a lot more epic. I mean, I go back to other games like XCOM, which I understand, turn-based game, a little bit different in how the combat works, but what that game does really well as an example is when you're firing at an enemy, it'll give you a cutscene. It'll give you cutscenes for basically every action that you do in the game, and it makes everything feel like it's way more important. So your shot that you're taking on this enemy, because you've got this cutscene, this cinematic little thing that doesn't always work properly, but it's still there, if you hit or miss it, it makes it feel a lot crazier and a lot cooler as it's happening, whereas if you just have them in like the overhead view of the map taking the shot and you miss, it's like, okay, so I just missed that one, whatever. But you get this extra bit of cinematic flair to it that makes every encounter way more intense and feel like it's way more important. And I feel like Pillars of Eternity 2 just doesn't really have that as much, and maybe I'm asking too much out of the engine, maybe I'm asking too much out of what this game is supposed to be, but it's something that I personally would have really liked to see improved on a little bit more, because that's an aspect that really hasn't been improved on since the first one. And that's not to say the combat is bad, it's perfectly serviceable, it's actually very good. I just personally want that extra little bit of feeling and pizzazz to everything that you're doing. But as far as traits go and abilities and classes, you can multi-class your characters. They've all got like 30 different abilities you can get. You can respec them out with different weapon proficiencies and all this other stuff that makes replayability as well really viable in it. And the amount of stuff you can do is all there. You get a lot of options in how you approach every combat scenario. I just wanted to be a bit more cinematic. So that's I don't know, maybe that won't annoy other people and you'll be totally fine with it. If that's the case, then you can pretty much disregard the last 5 minutes of this video. And if you're in for a more tactical role-playing game experience, then I think that this one does offer that in spades. Alright, so let's talk a bit about the story, the world, the side characters, the companions, that type of thing, because those are very important in a game like this as well, and they do enhance your enjoyment of the game as a whole. So, the storyline can be very confusing, especially if you haven't played the first Pillars of Eternity. If you haven't and you want to dive into this one, you can if you really want to. They do a decent job in trying to explain everything that happened in the last game because you are playing as the same character as you were last time. You can have you can decide to carry over your choices and your save files from the previous game if you have them, or you can make your own or choose from some pre-existing ones. But if you haven't played the first one, I would recommend probably playing that one before you dive into this one, otherwise you may be a little bit lost. One really handy thing that kind of mitigates that a little bit is they have a highlighting system in the dialogue and stuff, so if someone's talking about an event that happened previously, or a location, or a character, even if it's involved in that current questline and the current environment you're in, you can hover your mouse over it, it gives you like a little drop down, explains to you exactly what that is. That's really useful. Every RPG in existence needs to have that. I don't know why some of them don't. It gives you extra information instead of having to sift through like a codex or a journal and stuff like that. You get it all there as you're having the conversation to remind you, because there's a crap ton of stuff going on in this game and it's really needed. The storyline itself is pretty basic, to be honest. You're basically chasing a god. That's not a spoiler. That happens in the first 10 minutes of the game. And aside from that, there's tons of different side quests you can go on that take you to different parts of this archipelago region of this world that they've created. It's really cool to explore around it. So far, I've got to say the side quests have been infinitely more interesting than the main questline stuff that's been going on. That could vary from person to person, but I've met better characters and had a better time exploring the world and creating my own story through the side quests than I have going through the main quest line in the first 10 to 15 hours. You see some of the companions return from the last one, and they're better written, I would say, than the new ones that have been introduced so far. I've met, I think, 2 new ones, and the pirate guy, he's okay. I'm not going to give you many spoilers on their storylines or anything, or even name them or anything like that. He's fine. He's suitably witty. He's a little bit generic, I would say. And then the priest character that I met, I really don't like, and I think that's more of like a personal thing. I don't like characters like, say, Sarah from Dragon Age Inquisition. I found her to be extremely insufferable, and that's a very subjective thing. The priest that you meet in this game, I find her to be very similar in how she's extremely naive, and she kind of grates on me after a while. You meet her within like the first half hour though, so I'm not really concerned about spoilers with her. That's just like her general personality. She's fine in combat, like priest classes are cool and everything, but she kind of just irritates me. Thankfully, in this game, you can still go and hire completely different characters if you want to, and make them yourself, so that's also very useful. But I do like going through companion stories and stuff, so I'm gonna probably have to stick around with her regardless. One other thing that annoys me a little bit, and this is again completely subjective, the majority of my complaints with this game are very subjective things that may not annoy other people. I just don't like that there's like southern accents in this game. I don't know, it doesn't fit. So when you go into a medieval fantasy game, do you expect to hear southern people from like Alabama? Not really. I don't know, they have that, like the priest Zodi has that accent, and then the entire group of people from a specific region in the world have that accent in this game, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with it, I don't care really, but it just nags in my head that I don't associate southern accents with a medieval fantasy setting, and to me it just kind of like sticks out like a sore thumb. As a whole though, Pillars of Eternity 2 is exactly what I expected out of the game, because, you know, it's an Obsidian RPG. It's got a crap ton of really good storyline elements into it. That's probably their strongest suit when it comes to creating role-playing games. Their storylines have historically been very interesting. Their characters and the people you meet along the way, all really good stuff. The combat is serviceable. It's exactly what you would expect out of this game as well, so I can't really knock it for that. But I would like to see a little bit more innovation in how it plays out, I guess. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a really good classic-style D&D role-playing-esque experience, look no further. You've probably already bought this game. You've probably already started playing it. You might be further along in it than I am. If you're thinking about picking the game up, I would recommend playing the first one. there isn't a whole lot of improvements as a whole. You're not going to feel a lot of difference between the two games, so diving into the first one is still a perfectly fine experience. It's also a fantastic game, and it's going to make you less lost if you jump right into this one right away. So yeah, them's my thoughts on Pillars of Eternity 2. It's gonna rank pretty highly on my Games of the Year list. If you want to go and see that list, there is a link to my Discord server below that you can go and take a look at to see where everything is ranking. From best to worst, I go through and I edit it constantly throughout the year, so it's ever-changing and stuff. So don't take my word for where everything is, like, completely placed 100%. But if you want to get a good look-see at what I'm ranking throughout the year, that's probably the best place to go. Okay, I'm getting out of here now. I'm gonna go make myself some tea. My throat's kind of getting a little bit raspy right now, and I really want some good old tea. Tea's great. I highly recommend it. It's a very useful beverage.